Welcome to our deep dive. We're tackling genetic engineering today. And wow, you've sent us some really fascinating sources on this topic. We're excited to break them down and explore everything from how it all works to how it impacts our lives.
It's a big field, for sure. A lot to unpack.
Absolutely. So first things first, what exactly is genetic engineering? I mean, the Wikipedia article describes it as using technology to change an organism's genes.
Yeah, the key is it's targeted, you know? It's not just random mutations happening.
Okay, so I'm thinking like editing a document, like
Yeah.
you can cut and paste, rearrange, but with DNA.
Exactly. It's precise, and it opens up so many possibilities that traditional breeding just couldn't. You know, like breeding plants or animal.
Right. So this is different. We're going into the DNA and making specific changes.
Got it.
Yeah.
So when did all this start? Is it a recent thing?
Well, the groundwork was laid in the 70s, actually. The Wikipedia article mentions the first recombinant DNA molecule was created in 1972. That really paved the way for everything that came after. Wow, the 70s. So this technology's been around for a while. Were there any early wins that showed, like, hey, this stuff really works?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Just a year later, 1973, the first genetically modified organism was made.
Really? What was it?
A bacterium. It may not sound as exciting as some of the stuff that came later, but it proved that we could actually manipulate the genetic code of a living thing.
That's huge. Okay, I'm starting to see how significant this is. So can you give us a few examples of how genetic engineering is used today? Like, how does it affect us?
Sure, let's talk about GMOs. Genetically modified organisms, you probably encounter them every day without even realizing it.
Really? Where? I mean, like what?
Well, think about the food you eat. The Flab Savor tomato, it was engineered to last longer on the shelf.
Oh, right. And that was back in 1994. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, and today a lot of crops are genetically modified, to resist pests or herbicides.
So that's why sometimes I see non-GMO labels at the store.
Exactly. It's a big topic for sure, consumer choice and all that. But, genetic engineering goes way beyond food. The Wikipedia article talks about how it's used to make important medicines like insulin. It's been a game changer for treating diabetes.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that. That's amazing. And then there's the glowfish, right? The first genetically modified pet. It's just like a really cool example of how diverse this technology is.
Totally. It's fascinating how genetic engineering touches so many parts of our lives. We're using GMOs to study how genes even work, developing crops that, help with food security, even engineering bacteria to clean up, like oil spills.
It's mind-blowing, honestly.
Yeah.
The possibilities seem endless. But with such powerful tools, we have to talk about the ethics, right?
Of course. That's where things get, really complex. And there's an article, Genetic Engineering and the Consent of Future Persons. It goes deep into this, specifically with germline editing.
Germline editing. Changing genes that are passed down to future generations, that's a heavy topic.
It is. We're talking about decisions that could impact people who haven't even been born yet, people who have no say in the matter.
Right. And that brings up so many questions.
Yeah.
Do we have the right to make those choices for future generations? How can we know what they would want?
Exactly. And the article wrestles with those very questions. The idea of consent, it gets really complicated when you're talking about future generations. I mean, it's impossible to predict their values and desires.
So how do we even approach this ethically?
Well, the article suggests focusing on this concept of moral autonomy. It's not just about, like, a checkbox consent, but ensuring future generations have the capacity to make their own moral choices, no matter what genetic modifications we might introduce.
Okay, that makes sense. So respecting their freedom to make their own decisions, even if we disagree.
Exactly. But even if we figure out the ethics of germline editing, there's still the question of regulation. Genetic engineering and the law past, present, and beyond really highlights how complicated the global landscape is around this technology.
I can imagine. I mean, something this powerful, there must be all sorts of different approaches to regulating it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The articles compare the U.S. and EU regulatory frameworks for GMOs. Like, in the U.S., the focus is mainly on product safety. Is it safe to consume?
And what about the EU?
They take a broader approach, looking at the process, environmental impact, ethical considerations. They even use what's called the precautionary principle, meaning if there's a potential risk, even without absolute proof, they might restrict or ban the product.
So something considered safe in the U.S. could be banned in Europe.
Yep. It shows how many different perspectives and concerns there are surrounding genetic engineering. And these differing approaches have real consequences for, how GMO products are developed and available around the world.
This reminds me of the whole debate around GMO labeling.
Oh, absolutely. That's a hot topic. In the US, labeling isn't always mandatory, but in Europe, foods with more than 0.9% of approved GMOs have to be labeled.
So European consumers have more transparency about what's in their food.
That's the idea. People who support labeling, they argue it's about choice and transparency for the consumer. Opponents say it unfairly stigmatizes GMOs without scientific evidence of harm.
It seems like there are valid arguments on both sides. It's complicated.
It is. And then there's this concept of substantial equivalence that's used in the US, adds another layer to the whole thing. It basically says if a GMO is, basically the same as its non-GMO counterpart, it doesn't need extra scrutiny.
But wouldn't that mean some GMOs get approved without fully understanding their long-term effects?
That's exactly what the critics argue. They say that substantial equivalence might prevent a full evaluation of potential risks, especially ones that might not be obvious right away.
This is a lot to think about. It's clear that we need to be careful and consider all the implications of genetic engineering.
For sure. And really, we've just scratched the surface of this complex and rapidly changing field.
I'm already seeing that. So much to learn. And speaking of learning, I'm curious to hear more about the specific techniques involved in genetic engineering.
Let's dive into that next. We'll explore some of the tools scientists use to actually manipulate DNA, from recombinant DNA technology to the revolutionary CRISPR-Cas9.
I can't wait.
So now that we have a basic understanding, let's dig into some of the techniques that make genetic engineering possible. One of the biggest is recombinant DNA technology.
Recombinant DNA. It sounds so sci-fi, What is that exactly?
It's actually pretty straightforward. You're basically combining DNA from different sources, creating something totally new. Imagine taking, the best features of two cars and combining them into a supercar.
So we're talking hybrid DNA molecules. That's why.
Exactly. And this lets scientists introduce traits that wouldn't normally happen in an organism. For example, you can take a gene from bacteria and put it into a plant, and then that plant can resist a certain pest.
Wow, it's like giving organisms a genetic upgrade. But how does this actually work, step by step?
Well, there are a few steps. First, scientists have to isolate the gene they want to insert. Then they put that gene into a vector, which is basically a delivery system. Viruses and plasmids are popular vectors.
Okay, so the vector carries the gene into the target organism.
Right. And once it's inside, the gene becomes part of the organism's DNA, and that's when you get the new trait showing up.
It's super intricate. Are there other techniques besides recombinant DNA technology?
Oh, yeah, tons. Genetic engineering is always moving forward. There are these tools called targeted gene editing tools, and they've really changed the game.
Targeted gene editing, that sounds even more precise than recombinant DNA technology.
It is. With targeted gene editing, scientists can make super specific changes to DNA sequences. CRISPR-Cas9 is probably the most famous one. Think of it like a pair of molecular scissors cutting DNA in very precise spots.
So scientists can use CRISPR to get rid of harmful genes or even put in new ones with, perfect accuracy.
Exactly. It's like having a microscopic surgeon working on the DNA. CRISPR has opened up so many possibilities. I mean, we're talking correcting genetic defects in humans, engineering crops that can handle climate change. It's incredible.
This is seriously groundbreaking. It's amazing to see how far we've come since, the early days of recombinant DNA.
It is. But it's important to remember that while these technologies are amazing, they also come with ethical questions and societal concerns. As we get better tools, these conversations become even more important.
Right, for sure. So we've talked about the how of genetic engineering. Now let's talk about the why. What are some of the key applications? Where is this technology actually being used?
The applications are everywhere, honestly. It's mind-blowing. One of the most promising areas is gene therapy. We're talking about using genetic engineering to actually treat or prevent diseases.
So potentially curing genetic disorders.
Yes. By fixing faulty genes, we could treat things like cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, maybe even some cancers.
That's incredible. It seems like science fiction, but it's real.
It is, and it goes beyond just treating what's already there. We could use genetic engineering to stop diseases before they even start. Imagine a world where, genetic predispositions are corrected before they become a problem.
That would be revolutionary. What about applications outside of human health?
Well, we talked about agriculture before. GMOs are already being used to make crops produce more, resist pests, and have more nutrients.
Yeah, I see those non-GMO labels all the time at the store. But are there other things going on in agriculture with genetic engineering?
Definitely. Scientists are working on engineering crops that can survive droughts, grow in salty soil, even pull nitrogen right out of the air. That would mean less need for, synthetic fertilizers.
Wow, so we're talking about crops that are more sustainable and can handle climate change better.
Exactly. Genetic engineering could be crucial for, making sure there's enough food in the world as things change. And it goes beyond that. There's this whole field of industrial biotechnology that uses engineered organisms to produce all kinds of things. Biofuels, biodegradable plastics, you name it.
It's amazing to see all the different ways this technology is being used. And we can't forget about environmental applications, right?
You got it. Bioremediation is a big one. It uses genetically engineered organisms to clean up pollution. Think of bacteria that break down oil spills or remove heavy metals from contaminated soil.
It's incredible that we can use nature to fix environmental problems like that. But of course, with all these potential benefits, there had to be some risks and challenges too.
Right. Of course. No technology is perfect. We have to think about unintended consequences. Like, how do genetically modified organisms affect the environment? What are the ethical issues with human gene editing? These are ongoing discussions that need careful thought and open conversations.
It's clear that genetic engineering is a really powerful tool. It has the potential to change the world as we know it, but we have to be careful and responsible as we move forward.
I agree 100%. The future of genetic engineering depends on scientific advancements, but also on ethical frameworks and having honest public discussions.
Well said. And that brings us to our final thoughts. So we've covered so much in our deep dive on genetic engineering. It's been a wild ride, from the basics of how it works to the incredible ways it's being used.
It really is a fascinating field. I mean, the potential to revolutionize medicine, agriculture, so many things.
Absolutely. But of course, we can't forget about the potential risks and ethical concerns. There's a lot at stake here.
Right. And the source material really made me think about the long-term implications of, messing with the building blocks of life. Like, what unintended consequences might pop up as these technologies get, more powerful and more common.
Yeah, it's like, are we opening Pandora's box? We can't always predict how these changes might affect ecosystems or future generations down the line.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have ongoing research, ethical debates, and transparent regulations. Like, take synthetic biology, for example. It goes a step beyond just modifying existing organisms.
Synthetic biology, that sounds like something out of like a futuristic movie.
I know, right? It's about designing and creating entirely new biological systems, organisms that have completely new functions and capabilities.
So not just tweaking what's already there, but actually building brand new life forms.
Pretty much. It's exciting for sure. It could help us solve some of humanity's biggest problems. But, of course, it also raises a whole bunch of ethical and safety questions.
Yeah, I can see that. If we're creating entirely new organisms, how can we be sure they won't harm existing ecosystems or even us?
That's a huge question. Scientists and policymakers are definitely wrestling with that. We need strong risk assessment, containment strategies, and constant monitoring to make sure we're developing synthetic biology responsibly.
It feels like we're entering a whole new world where the possibilities are limitless, but so are the potential risks.
We are. And that's why it's so important for everyone to be informed about genetic engineering and what it all means. We need to balance the excitement of scientific progress with caution and ethical awareness.
It's a reminder that scientific progress should always consider its potential impact on the world, and on future generations.
Absolutely. The decisions we make today about genetic engineering will have huge consequences. I mean, we're talking about shaping the future of life itself.
It's a bit daunting, but also kind of empowering, right? We have the opportunity to shape this future, but we have to make informed choices and use these powerful technologies responsibly.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, we hope you've gained a better understanding of genetic engineering, all its complexities, and its incredible potential.
It's been an amazing journey, exploring everything from gene editing to the ethical questions that come with it.
And we encourage you to keep learning about this fascinating field. Stay informed and engage in the conversations that will shape the future of genetic engineering.
Because ultimately, the future of this technology and its impact on our world is something that affects us all.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of genetic engineering.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.